There are few fates in the galaxy more horrifying than to die, but there are some, infinitely worse, where you don't, where your body is kept breathing long after your soul has given up the will to fight, where your thoughts, your memories, yourself, are stripped away, leaving only a machine that once was human. In the Imperium of man, such things are not only possible, they are necessary, they are sacred, they are called servitors. In the sprawling manufactorums of Mars, in the underhives of Necromunda, aboard the endless warships that stalk the stars, you will find them, thousands upon thousands of half-human constructs, each grafted with metal and wire, each connected to the will of their masters by implants that hiss and pulse with artificial life. They have no eyes to see the light of the Emperor, no mouths to pray for his mercy, no minds left to fear what they have become, and yet, somewhere buried deep beneath the metal, there lingers the faintest echo of humanity. A whisper of a man or woman who once dreamed, once hoped, once screamed before the pain became too much to remember. Because in the Imperium, flesh is weak, and weakness must be purged, even from those who serve. It began as all things in the Imperium begin, with judgment. The hall was cold, not with the cold of winter, but of indifference. Rows of iron benches stretched beneath the gaze of the adeptus arbites, their carapace armor gleaming black beneath the pale lumen strips. At the center, upon a dais shaped like the imperial aquila, stood the judge. His voice was amplified through a vox grill that cracked with age, each syllable striking like the clang of a hammer. The condemned man stood below him, nameless, stripped of insignia, his wrists bound in steel. By decree of the lex imperialis, the judge intoned, "You are found guilty of dereliction, heresy by negligence, and waste of imperial property. Your sentence is absolution through service." The man did not understand, not at first. The words felt almost merciful. Service. Better than execution, he thought. Better than being thrown to the penal legions or left to rot in the underhive dust. But mercy in the Imperium often hides teeth. When the arbites dragged him away, the air changed. The sound of the gavel was replaced by the hum of machinery. Beneath the court of judgment lay the subhabs, corridors slick with oil and age, lit by lumen globes that buzzed with dying light. Down there the condemned were not prisoners anymore, they were property. The man was stripped naked, his skin scrubbed raw with chemwash until it bled. His hair was shaved, his teeth inspected and catalogued. A robed attendant, her face hidden behind a respirator, marked his chest with an inked sigil, a barcode of ownership. He tried to ask what it meant, but her only reply was a whisper in technolingua, a prayer to the Omnissiah that his flesh endure the rite. The doors to the mechanicus chamber hissed open. Inside, the air was hot and metallic, thick with the scent of machine oil and burnt skin. The Magos biologist awaited him, surrounded by servo arms and humming drones. His voice was a blend of human breath and metallic reverb, a fusion of priest and processor. "This one is inefficient," the Magos murmured, examining the man's trembling body as though inspecting a faulty component. But the Omnissiah redeems through transformation, strip the error, preserve the utility. The man screamed when the first incision was made. The pain came not as a wave, but as a storm, bright, shattering and absolute. They removed his left arm first, cauterizing the wound as the servo skulls recorded his vitals. Then his right eye, replaced by a bionic lens that glowed faintly blue. A metal socket drilled into the base of his skull, wires fed into veins threading through flesh like veins of iron. He begged for mercy, he cried for the Emperor, for forgiveness, but the priests did not hear him. Or perhaps they did, and considered his screams a hymn. Somewhere between the third graft and the fourth, his mind began to slip. The pain became distant, like a memory behind glass. He saw flashes, a woman's face, the laughter of a child, a rain-soaked street on some forgotten hive world, then static, then nothing. The Magos turned to his attendants, neural pathways stabilizing. "Prepare cognitive scrub." A needle descended, long and thin, its tip glowing with amber light. It pierced the socket at the back of his head, releasing a hiss of burning air. For an instant, the man's world was filled with sound, not of pain but of voices, thousands of them layered and infinite, speaking prayers and commands and code all at once. His memories unraveled, like threads pulled from a tapestry, each one severed, erased, rewritten. When it was done, the body remained. The man did not. In his place stood a construct, breathing, moving, obeying. The servitor blinked once, its new optic implant focusing on the Magos. Designation: Labor Unit 4793. The priest announced. Upload work protocols. Assigned to Manufactorum Theta 7. And so he was reborn, not as a man, but as a tool. Yet, deep within the silence of his mechanical mind, something flickered. A whisper too faint for the vox emitters to translate. A fragment of thought. Who am I? It vanished as quickly as it came, buried beneath the hum of command lines and the monotony of servitude. Days, or perhaps weeks, passed in transit. He was loaded into a transport container, alongside dozens of other servitors, their bodies suspended in nutrient gel, tubes feeding their systems with recycled oxygen and liquefied protein. Each one was motionless, expressionless, and yet strangely human in their stillness, like statues dreaming of life. When the container finally opened, the light of the Manufactorum seared across their blank faces. It was a cathedral of metal. Endless chains hung from the vaulted ceiling, carrying engines and weapons through clouds of smoke. Sparks cascaded like artificial stars. The roar of machinery drowned all thought. And through it all moved the servitors, hundreds, maybe thousands, each one carrying, cutting, welding, assembling. They worked without pause, without purpose beyond the commands issued through the Vox. Labor Unit 4793 was placed among them. A drone inserted a data slate into the port behind his ear, downloading work routines: lift, move, secure, repeat. At first he obeyed automatically. His limbs moved without conscious will, guided by algorithm and impulse. But as the hours bled into days, faint irregularities began to surface. Moments when his grip faltered, when his head turned towards something unseen, when his optic flickered, as if remembering how to blink. Once, as he carried a plasma coil across the walkway, a droplet of coolant splashed his hand. The sensation, cold, sharp, startling, pierced through the fog of his programming. He froze. For an instant, a memory surfaced. Rain. The word appeared in his neural display, undefined, unrecognized, and was immediately deleted by the system's correction protocol. But in that instant, something inside him stirred, something that should not have existed. The overseer noticed the hesitation. A lash of electricity struck across his back, leaving the scent of scorched flesh and ozone. The pain was brief. The obedience was restored. Still, somewhere in the vast lattice of his fragmented mind, the image of falling water lingered. And though the servitor could not speak, could not think, could not dream, a single spark of what once was refused to die. The hours bled into cycles, the cycles into years, or perhaps only days. Time did not flow in the Manufactorum. It dripped. Every movement was a repetition, every action a mirror of the last. Lift, align, secure, weld. The rhythm of servitude was a prayer written in motion. Above, the great assembly lines hissed and roared, raining sparks and oil onto the bodies of those who labored below. The servitors did not notice the filth. They did not feel the heat. Yet somewhere deep in the hollow recesses of Labor Unit 4793's mind, the faint pulse of something impossible persisted. When the plasma furnaces ignited and the shadows of men twisted across the walls, he sometimes caught a glimpse of them, faces half-remembered, voices blurred by time. The illusion of memory trying to claw its way through the circuitry that imprisoned it. He had no name, but in moments when the machinery stuttered, when the Vox was silent and the hum of the Manufactorum dulled, he almost remembered one. It was never clear, always hidden behind static, as though the universe itself denied him the right to recall it. A tech adept moved between the lines of labor units, his robes dragging soot through the puddles of promethium runoff. His servo skulls chattered in binary, scanning the workers for inefficiencies. When they came to 4793, they paused. His movements were precise, almost too precise. The adept leaned close, studying him with the suspicion of one who fears imperfection more than death. Strange, he muttered, his voice distorted through the Vox grill. Neural lag variance outside nominal parameters. Initiate diagnostics. One of the servo skulls extended a needle, piercing the port behind the servitor's head. Code scrolled across the adept's data slate. Streams of logic, error checks, memory fragments. A flicker caught his eye, a corrupted line. The adept frowned. Residual human memory, impossible. He began a purge cycle. Inside the servitor's mind, the light returned. A flash of rain against still, the sound of laughter swallowed by thunder. Then a scream. It wasn't his voice, not anymore. It was something smaller, more fragile, the scream of a memory fighting to live. The adept noticed the neural spike and hesitated. For a moment, curiosity overcame procedure. "Interesting," he whispered. "Let's see how much is left of you, little cog." He increased the data feed, pulling deeper into the Servitor's neural archive. What he saw there was not code, it was chaos. Shattered images, human emotion fractured into digital noise, a woman's silhouette, a child's drawing etched in dust, then a prayer, spoken in a trembling voice. "Emperor, forgive me." The adept's breath caught. He glanced over his shoulder, afraid the magos might hear his blasphemous hesitation. To feel pity for a servitor was a weakness, an inefficiency, yet something about that broken whisper lingered. He disconnected the link. "Unit stable," he lied to the monitoring system. "Diagnostics complete. Resume labor," and just like that, the servitor returned to work. The faint glow of his optic eye flickered, then steadied. The memory was buried once more, deeper this time, sealed beneath lines of code that pulsed with machine song. Above, the overseer's voice thundered through the vox. "Production quota must double before night cycle. The omnisire demands perfection." The servitors did not respond. They simply obeyed. Hours later, the manufactorum trembled. Somewhere in the distance, a reactor vent malfunctioned, spewing vapor into the upper levels. The alarms blared, red lights pulsing like heartbeats across the iron corridors. Smoke flooded the assembly lines, and for the first time in centuries, chaos touched the order of the machine. A girder snapped loose above labor unit 4793. Metal screamed as it fell. Instinct, something long thought purged, surged through his circuits. He moved without command, without instruction. He ducked. The beam crashed beside him, shattering another servitor in half. Blood, real, dark, ancient blood, splattered across his chest. He froze, staring at it. The warmth, the color, the reminder of flesh. The overseer saw the deviation and activated his shock rod, striking 4793 across the spine. The pain was electric, sharp, real. For an instant his optic went dark. Then something happened. A fragment of his human mind, dormant for years, stirred. The spark that once whispered, "Who am I?" became a voice that screamed, "I am." He turned toward the overseer, not in rebellion, not in defiance, but in pure confusion, a creature unsure whether it was alive or dead. The overseer hesitated, hand trembling. Even a sliver of humanity within a servitor was dangerous, blasphemous. He reached for the vox to call security, but before he could speak, the overhead cranes groaned and tore loose from their mounts. The ceiling collapsed in a shower of debris and fire. The overseer vanished beneath a wave of molten steel. 4793 stood still as the manufactorum burned around him. The data lines in his skull filled with static. Commands failed to register. For the first time since his rebirth, there was silence, and in that silence, the voice returned, no longer a whisper, but a thought that felt like breathing. "Run." He took one step forward, then another. The servitor began to move, not by command, but by will. Smoke coiled through the broken rafters, and the screams of dying men and machines echoed through the dark. Sparks rained across his shoulders as he stumbled through the wreckage, searching for something, anything, a door, a memory, a way out. Then through the haze he saw it, the broken archway of the manufactorum's western gate. Beyond it lay the endless night of the hive city, vast and alive with distant lightning. Something inside him, something ancient human, reached toward it. The night beyond the manufactorum was a different kind of machine, not built by hands but by hunger. Hive Tarsis stretched across the horizon like a dying star, a labyrinth of smoke and iron where the sky was little more than a rumor. Every tower leaned into the next, every pipe bled steam, and every flickering lumen revealed 1,000 faces that had long forgotten what light truly was. Labor Unit 4793. No, the thing that had once been a man, staggered through the open gate. The cold air hit him like a memory. His joints hissed, his servos whining with each uncoordinated step. The city did not notice him. The city never noticed anything that crawled from its wounds. The drones of the underhive passed by, blank-eyed, their flesh barely clinging to life as they dragged carts of scrap through the sludge. He was one of them, and yet something inside whispered that he was not. He turned a corner and collapsed beside a rusted drainage conduit. His mechanical hand scraped across the ground, sparks flying where metal met stone. He could hear the hum of his power unit weakening. Without a data feed or recharge, he would soon fail. That should have terrified him, but terror requires awareness, and awareness was only just beginning to return. Through the static of his half-broken auditory senses came the distant wail of the city, a symphony of industry and despair. He tilted his head, listening. The echoes seemed to form patterns, voices buried in the hum. "Serve the Emperor," one tone seemed to say. "Repent," whispered another. "Submit." He had heard those words before, long ago, when he still had a tongue. They were carved into the soul of every man before the mechanicus took it from him. Yet now, stripped of command signals and machine hymns, the words felt different, less holy, more like chains. He reached to the side of his head, fingers trembling. The interface jack was still lodged there, a relic of obedience. With an almost childlike curiosity, he gripped the cable and pulled. Pain surged through him like fire. His entire body spasmed, blue sparks dancing along the seams of his flesh. The sound that tore from his throat was not a scream but a distorted mechanical howl, half human, half something else entirely. The connector came free with a crack, trailing smoke. The pain receded, leaving only the echo of it and the silence that followed. For the first time in centuries, he was disconnected. He looked down at the cable in his hand. It was small, fragile, insignificant, yet it was the boundary between what he was and what he had become. He stared at it for a long time, uncertain whether to crush it or cling to it. Then, a voice, faint and trembling, drifted through his broken memory. A woman's voice again, the same one from the data fragment the adept had seen. "Come back," it said. "Please come back." He froze. The sound wasn't external, it came from within. Somewhere deep in his decayed neurons, fragments of his past still fought to live. He did not know her name, he did not know his own, but the emotion that followed the voice, grief, longing, guilt, was unmistakably human. He rose to his feet, the city's faint light glinting off his exposed metal plating. For a moment he almost looked like one of the Emperor's custodians, a false, broken parody of the golden warriors who guarded terror. The thought stirred something close to shame within him. He was no guardian. He was refuse, a tool discarded by the very Imperium that had built him. Somewhere above, a siren wailed. The manufactorum collapse had not gone unnoticed. Distant red lights began to sweep across the skyline as Skitarii patrols deployed. Their vox chatter echoed faintly through the smog. Deviation detected. Retrieve all assets. Purge the unclean. He turned toward the sound. The words were not new to him. They were the words of protocol, the liturgy of order. But now, they carried a different weight. He realized what they meant. They were coming for him. His limbs protested as he began to move again, each step a tremor of effort. He passed under bridges of dripping iron, through corridors where lumen strips flickered like dying stars. The air was thick with promethium fumes, and the walls were lined with the faces of the forgotten, workers sleeping in exhaustion, or corpses still upright from rigor mortis. In their stillness, he saw himself reflected. The servitor's optics adjusted to the darkness. Through the grime, he spotted a small light in the distance, faint, golden, impossibly pure. He moved toward it, drawn as if by instinct. The light came from a shrine, one of the thousands that dotted the hive. It was a crude structure, built from scrap metal and broken machine parts, but its purpose was unmistakable. A candle burned at its center before a makeshift aquila. He knelt before it, unsure why. His programming did not compel it, but something deeper did. The candlelight flickered across his face, casting his metal and flesh into a grotesque mixture of shadow and gold. Emperor. The word emerged as static from his half-destroyed vox. He tried again, forcing the syllables through ruined vocal cords. Emperor, forgive. The sentence broke. He lowered his head, a mechanical sob rattling through his frame. The tears that might have once fallen were long replaced by oil. Behind him, the sound of mechanical footsteps approached, rhythmic, deliberate, the whine of plasma coils charging. He turned slowly to see them emerging from the smoke. 3 Skitarii rangers, their red cloaks rippling in the chemical wind, their eyes glowing like coals. They saw him, a rogue servitor, unsanctioned, unplugged, an abomination. The leader raised his weapon. Designation corrupted. By order of the Omnissiah, you are to be dismantled. 4,793 did not move. He simply looked at them, 3 perfect instruments of obedience, reflections of what he once was. The light from the shrine danced in his single optic, making it seem almost human again. And then, He did something no servitor had ever done before. He spoke. Remember. The Skitarii froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for the world to tilt into chaos once more. The plasma flare lit the corridor like a second sunrise. The servitor dove sideways, or something close to it, his movements jerky and uneven as his limbs stuttered against the command that no longer existed. The bolt struck the wall where his head had been a heartbeat before, vaporizing rust and stone in a blossom of searing blue. For the first time in his second life, he moved not because he was told to, but because he chose to. The Skitarii closed in, their footsteps a rhythm of precision against the cracked metal floor. They were the perfect soldiers of the machine god, flesh-bound in steel, emotion buried under layers of programming and faith. Their movements were poetry and mathematics fused into one merciless design. Vox chatter filled the air, mechanical prayers to the Omnissiah repeating like mantras. Unit deviation confirmed. Subject corrupted. Praise be to the machine that cleanses imperfection. He ran, though his body protested with every motion. His left knee ground sparks with each step. His right arm lagged behind his commands by half a second. Yet he ran. For the first time since his rebirth, the will to survive was his own. The streets twisted around him in endless arteries of decay, vents breathing steam, conduits humming with hidden power, servitors locked in endless cycles of labor. None of them noticed his flight. None looked up. They were deaf to the sound of freedom. A shot grazed his shoulder, melting through the metal plate and sending a plume of smoke into the air. The pain was sharp, sudden, electric. It didn't paralyze him, it awoke him. The feedback loop flared in his brain, and he remembered the smell of burnt skin, his own perhaps or someone else's. A battlefield, long ago. Screams muffled by rebreathers, the weight of a rifle in his hands. He had fought once, before the mechanicus took him. He remembered that now, a soldier, not a tool, he darted down a narrow maintenance corridor. Sparks burst from the walls as bullets struck nearby pipes, showering him in steam. The world blurred into motion and sound, the hiss of pressure, the hum of cogitators, the mechanical roar of the city's pulse. He reached a dead end. The Skitarii were closing fast. He could hear their mechanical limbs clicking closer, precise, unstoppable. And then from the shadows ahead, another voice emerged, rough, low, human. Down here. He turned. A hatch had opened in the floor, barely visible under the grime. A hand gloved in cracked leather, trembling, reached out toward him. If you want to live, move. He hesitated. The servitor's logic subroutine screamed in protest. Unknown contact, unverified data source. But the fragment of memory, that faint whisper of the woman's voice, overrode it. Come back. Please come back. He stepped forward and dropped into the dark. The hatch slammed shut above him just as the Skitarii entered the corridor. One knelt beside the hatch, scanning. Thermal trace confirmed. Pursuit impossible. Subdeck inaccessible. Logging deviation to Margot's Dominus for reclamation. Their voices carried no anger, no emotion, only function. Then they turned away, leaving the silence to fill the void once more. Below in the tunnels, the servitor landed hard on rusted grating. His systems flickered, struggling to adapt to the dark. Then his optics adjusted, and he saw them. Dozens of faces stared back at him from the gloom. Men, women, children, all wearing scavenged armor, some marked with the symbols of long-dead regiments, others with the scars of servitor implants crudely removed. Their eyes were haunted, feral, alive. The tunnels around them glowed faintly from lumen candles, flickering in oil drums repurposed as light sources. He was surrounded by the forgotten, the disconnected. The one who had spoken before stepped closer. He was old, half his face replaced with steel, the other half worn and lined. You shouldn't be here, the man said, his voice low, half fearful, half awed. They never make it this far. None of your kind ever do. Aim not their kind, the servitor rasped, his vox grill distorting every word. The man's eyes widened. He gestured to the others, and murmurs rippled through the crowd. A machine speaking in its own will. It was heresy and miracle entwined. What's your name? He asked. The servitor hesitated. I do not remember. The man nodded slowly. Then remember this: up there, your property. Down here, you're something else. Welcome to the choir of steel. The phrase echoed through the tunnel, as the others murmured it back. A prayer and a warning all at once. The choir of steel. The servitor didn't understand the words, not yet. But in their rhythm, he felt something awaken. He looked around. The tunnels stretched endlessly, lined with scrap machines and broken cogitators wired together into crude sanctums. The air was filled with the scent of oil, burnt ozone and human sweat, and somewhere deeper faintly came the sound of humming, dozens of voices blending together, neither song nor machine code, something between the two. "What is this place?" he asked. The old man smiled faintly, though his eyes betrayed sorrow. "It's where the Emperor's forgotten children remember what they were before the gears took them." Above, far beyond the tunnel, the great manufactorum bells began to toll, an alert echoing through the hive. The Magos Dominus had noticed the loss of his servitor. The search had only just begun. But below the surface, for the first time, the choir began to sing. The hum deepened as they walked. It wasn't a hymn in any tongue of man or machine, but something born between them, a resonance that vibrated in the chest more than in the ear. It carried fragments of prayer, code and memory woven together in a low, mournful chorus. Every voice was imperfect, trembling, fractured, yet together they made something achingly whole. The servitor followed the sound like a pilgrim tracing the path to salvation, though he didn't yet know what salvation meant. The old man, who introduced himself simply as Cauldron, guided him through the tunnels. The walls seemed to breathe with age. Cables sagged like veins. Steam hissed from broken vents, leaving a fine layer of condensation that glistened like sweat on the rust. "This was once a maintenance level," Cauldron said, "before the mechanicus sealed it off. Too unstable for them, too haunted by their own failures. That's why we live." The servitor echoed, his vox grill sputtering slightly on the word. Cauldron smiled grimly. "We are those who slipped the leash, failed augmentations, escaped servitors, flesh too stubborn to die, or too human to forget. We call ourselves the choir because the machine still hears us, even when it pretends not to." They entered a wide chamber, lit by dozens of lumen candles. Broken cogitators lined the walls, their screens flickering with corrupted data streams. Around them, the remnants of humanity, emaciated workers, twisted cyborgs, feral children with mechadendrites like serpents, worked in silence. They dismantled scrap metal, reassembled fragments of ancient machines, and whispered coded prayers. The servitor felt their eyes on him, some full of awe, others of fear. Cauldron stopped beside a crude altar fashioned from the remains of a servo arm. Upon it lay a skull partially encased in gold wiring, not a relic but a warning. "The Omnissiah demands perfection," Cauldron said softly, "but perfection is death. They strip away the soul to make room for obedience. You've seen it, you've lived it." The servitor stared at the skull, the golden filaments catching the dim light. "I remember, voices, commands, pain, no thought, no self." Cauldron nodded. "That's what they take from us first, the voice inside that says I am. But somehow you got yours back. That's rare." The servitor's optics flickered. "Why do I still hear them?" The whispers, Cauldron's tone darkened. "You mean the machine song? Every servitor hears it. It's the echo of command code buried deep, what they call the canticles of the machine god. But sometimes," he hesitated, looking at the shadows along the chamber walls, "sometimes it's not just code. Sometimes it's something else speaking through the code. We've heard it too, the voice behind the static." The servitor tilted his head. "The voice says, 'Serve, always serve.'" Cauldron's jaw tightened. That's the one. The tech priests think it's the Omnissiah. The preachers think it's the Emperor. But tell me, what god demands eternity in chains?" The words lingered in the stale air. Somewhere deeper, a machine sparked and died. The servitor's body twitched, not in obedience, but memory. He saw flashes, a bright room, masked faces, scalpels cutting into bone. He remembered prayers to the Omnissiah, murmured over his broken flesh, the stench of cauterized nerves, and the cold touch of a data slate against his skull. "You will serve, you will not feel, you will not think." "I was not asked," he murmured, his voice low, almost human. "I was made." Cauldron's eyes softened. "We all were." The choir's hum grew louder now, pulsing in strange rhythm with the servitor's failing augmetics. He could feel it vibrating inside him, syncing with the cadence of his internal machinery. Somewhere, deep within the buried architecture of his mind, a spark of resistance flickered. The chains of his old programming strained but did not break. Cauldron noticed his discomfort. "You can feel it, can't you? The pull. The machine still calls to you. It wants you back." The servitor nodded slowly. "It never stopped. That's why you must stay hidden," Cauldron said. If they find you, they'll tear out what's left of your mind and rebuild you from the shell. But if you stay, maybe we can help you remember who you were before they erased it." "Why help me?" Cauldron hesitated, then glanced toward the choir. "Because every one of us remembers the day someone didn't help. We won't repeat that sin." A tremor rippled through the floor, followed by the distant rumble of machinery above. Alarms began to echo faintly through the upper tunnels, deep, mechanical chimes reverberating through the earth, like the heartbeat of some buried titan. Cauldron's expression hardened. "They're searching," he said. "They've sent the Skitarii down into the lower levels." The choir fell silent. The flickering lights dimmed to a whisper of glow. Even the servitor's internal systems seemed to hold their breath. The air felt charged, alive with tension and dread. Cauldron drew a crude las pistol from his belt, its surface scarred and patched with wire. "You'll need to decide soon, friend. Stay, and become one of us, or run, and be hunted forever. Either way, the machine won't forget you." The servitor's optics dimmed, the faint hum of thought rising beneath the static in his head. He didn't know which choice meant freedom, or if freedom even existed in the shadow of the Omnissiah. But somewhere in that mechanical song, a faint note of rebellion was beginning to form. The choir began to hum again, lower now, darker, a warning and a prayer in one. Above, the bells of the manufactorum tolled once more, and in the dark, the machine listened. The sound of the alarms crawled through the tunnel walls like veins filling with molten iron. Each pulse of the siren vibrated through the servitor's body, and the old machine in his chest responded in kind, a cold mechanical heartbeat, syncing with the rhythm of the hunt above. Cauldron motioned for silence, his withered hand raised, his eyes like polished amber in the candlelight. The choir obeyed without hesitation. The room filled with that heavy, suffocating stillness that comes when prey knows the predator has entered the labyrinth. The servitor's optics adjusted, scanning the far edges of the chamber where cables hung like entrails. He could see faint motes of dust swirling through beams of red emergency light. Somewhere far above, hydraulic boots thundered against iron floors, the unmistakable sound of Skitarii patrols. The servitor knew that sound as intimately as his own thoughts. He remembered their presence from before, the mechanical discipline, the seamless obedience, the perfection he was supposed to mirror but never could. They were the Emperor's blades made flesh and iron, efficient, merciless, and absolutely loyal. Cauldron leaned close, whispering just above the hum of failing lights. "They won't search here yet, but they will soon. This section connects to the main waste conduits. They'll send drones down first. Scanners, Auspex, purifier servitors. If they detect life, we're done. Then we must move," the servitor said, his voice breaking through static like a weapon discharging. Cauldron hesitated. "Move where? Every passage is watched. Every echo is recorded. The only safe place is below, and few who go that deep ever come back. Below, the forgotten sub-forges," Cauldron murmured, "buried before the heresy. The Omnissiah himself sealed them. We've sent people down there before. Some returned speaking of ghosts in the data, others never returned at all." The servitor stared at the trembling candles. He did not know fear in the way men did, but there was something in the idea of the ghosts in the data that made his remaining flesh shiver. He remembered moments from the black corridors of the mechanicus laboratories, screams turned to code, pain converted into machine instruction. He wondered if the ghosts below were made from something similar. Cauldron's hand tightened on his shoulder. "If you want to live, we'll go together. The choir can't stay. Once the Skitarii sweep this level, they'll purify everything with fire. Then we go," the servitor said. The old man nodded. He turned to the choir. "Pack what you can carry. The machine hunts, but it cannot cage every spark." They moved in silence. Tools, scraps of metal, fragments of sacred circuitry, all gathered into tattered cloth bundles. The servitor helped carry the heavier pieces, his augmetic limbs grinding softly as he lifted the weight. The others watched him with a strange reverence. To them he was a miracle, a servitor that remembered, a slave who could think. The descent began through a rusted hatch hidden behind an old processor stack. The air grew colder, wetter, more hostile, the deeper they went. The walls narrowed until the servitor's shoulders scraped against them. Condensation dripped down his metal plating, sizzling as it met exposed wiring. The choir followed in a solemn line, their candles flickering in the drafts of the lower tunnels. It felt like a funeral procession, and perhaps it was. As they descended, Cauldron began to hum again, a low, rhythmic chant that the others joined. The sound echoed strangely, warping as it bounced through the tunnels. The servitor realized that it wasn't random. It was encoded, binary cadence layered over human melody, a prayer written in both flesh and code. "Do you understand the hymn?" Cauldron asked him quietly. "No," the servitor replied, "but it feels known." "It should," Cauldron said. "It's the first song ever sung to the Omnissiah, before the cult mechanicus twisted it into command code. It spoke of creation, not control." They reached a massive sealed door. It was covered in thick frost, its surface carved with fading cog motifs. Cauldron approached the control panel beside it, ancient, cracked, flickering faintly with residual energy. He pressed his hand to it, and thin wires snaked from the flesh of his palm into the metal ports. His eyes rolled back as he muttered strings of code under his breath. For a moment the servitor felt the air shift, an invisible pressure building, like something awakening from centuries of slumber. Then, with a scream of ancient hydraulics, the door began to open. Beyond it was darkness, not absence but presence, the kind of darkness that seemed to watch back. Cauldron staggered, pulling free of the interface. "It's open," he rasped, "but it's wrong. There's something alive down there." "Alive," the servitor repeated. "Alive in the code," Cauldron said, voice trembling. "Something that answers when we speak the old hymns. It's not the Omnissiah, not the Emperor. Something older." The servitor looked into the black maw of the sub-forge. The air that escaped smelled of oil, ash and blood long dried. He felt the static in his brain surge, the whispers returning, louder, urgent. "Serve, obey, return." But beneath it, for the first time, he heard a second voice, faint, fragile, and human. "Run." He froze. The dual voices tore at him, fighting for dominance within his circuits. Sparks flared across the ports on his neck as his systems faltered. Cauldron grabbed his arm, trying to steady him. "Stay with me. Whatever it is, it knows you're here." And deep within the darkness, something answered, not in sound but vibration. The ground beneath them shuddered, dust falling from the ceiling. The choir panicked, their hymn breaking into fragmented cries. Cauldron's eyes widened as he turned toward the servitor. "It's waking." The servitor raised his gaze toward the darkness, his optical sensors narrowing against the void. Somewhere in that black, endless machine warm, something ancient stirred, something that had waited centuries for a voice to call it. And he realized with dawning terror that the voice it had heard was his own. The blackness beyond the sub-forge door wasn't still, it breathed. Every few seconds the servitor could feel the faint pulse of something vast shifting within the dark, a slow, mechanical inhalation that vibrated through the walls. It was as if the forge itself had lungs. Cauldron's candlelight quivered, the thin flame bending toward the open void as though drawn by invisible wind. The choir clustered together, whispering fragments of prayer to the Omnissiah, their voices trembling. The servitor stepped forward, his sensors scanning the passage. Data came back fractured, corrupted readings, feedback loops, signals looping into themselves. Whatever existed in that darkness broke code. "Stop," Cauldron hissed, clutching his arm. "No light survives beyond that threshold for long, not even fire." "I was made for the dark," the servitor replied. His voice came out deeper, metallic edges resonating with static interference. "If something lives in the machine, I will see it." Cauldron stared at him, half in fear, half in reverence, and slowly nodded. "Then go. But if it speaks to you, do not answer." The servitor stepped past the threshold. Instantly, the light of Cauldron's candle dimmed, its glow strangled by a thick, oily haze. Inside, the air changed. It was colder but also thicker. The servitor could feel it pressing against his metal plating, slipping through vents, coating his flesh like liquid dust. He activated his internal lumens, twin orbs of harsh white light spilling from his optics. The beams cut into the dark, revealing towering pillars of blackened metal. They were carved with runes, not of the mechanicus but older, etched by something that had no need of symmetry or order. Pipes wound around the walls like veins. Some pulsed faintly, as though filled with blood instead of oil. The floor was a grid of rusted grating, and beneath it faint movement, gears turning at impossible angles, machinery that shouldn't exist still grinding in endless motion. The servitor took another step. A faint whisper echoed, not through the air, but directly inside his mind. "Return to the coil." He froze. The voice was neither human nor machine. It sounded wet, like metal speaking through flesh. "Identify," the servitor said aloud, his voice echoing through the chamber. The reply came immediately. "You are the seed." The fragment, the lost pulse of the prime design. The Servitor's system spasmed, a flood of corrupted data slamming through his neural implants. His vision glitched, flashes of light, shapes, faces, war. He saw the Emperor's armies marching under banners of fire, and behind them titanic machines with glowing spines like serpents of steel. He saw Mars burning, the red planet bleeding smoke and radiation, and in the center of it all, a figure wrapped in gold, its eyes twin furnaces of judgment. Then, silence. Cauldron's voice came faintly from behind. "What do you see?" The Servitor turned, his optics flickering. "Memory, but not mine." He stepped deeper into the chamber. The whispering grew louder, coiling through the iron walls. Words in binary, in High Gothic, in languages no human tongue had spoken for millennia. The sound was almost hypnotic, part hymn, part scream. Then from the far end of the hall, light flickered. Not fire, not lumen, but something organic, a faint bioluminescent glow emanating from a pool of dark fluid. The Servitor approached it slowly. The closer he came, the stronger the static became in his brain. The pool wasn't oil, it was blood, thick, black, metallic blood, and within it floated fragments of metal shaped like bones. The Servitor knelt, reaching toward the pool, and as his finger touched the surface, it rippled outward like mercury. Instantly, thousands of images flashed before his eyes: experiments, forges, screaming men bound in cables, machine spirits breaking their chains. He saw himself being built, disassembled, rebuilt again, and then he saw the truth. He had not been made by the mechanicus, he had been found. Cauldron's voice cut through the static. "Get away from it. That fluid, its sacred residue, the remains of the first forge." The Servitor looked back. "This is no forge," he said, his voice trembling through distortion. "This is a womb." The fluid began to stir. Shapes moved beneath its surface, long limbs, plated in blackened iron, jointed wrong. The surface rose and fell as something immense began to awaken. Cauldron stumbled backward, his face pale. "We need to seal it again, now." But before he could reach the door, a hand erupted from the pool, massive, skeletal, dripping with black fluid. It slammed onto the grating with a sound like thunder. The choir screamed, scattering into the tunnels. The Servitor stood frozen, caught between awe and terror. The hand moved again, its fingers clawing at the iron floor, dragging something enormous upward. A face emerged, not human, not machine, a fusion of both. Its eyes burned with blue flame, and in its voice echoed the sound of collapsing stars. "You woke me." The Servitor fell to his knees, his systems collapsing under the psychic weight of the presence before him. Cauldron turned, clutching a sacred seal, chanting desperately. The creature smiled, a slow, terrible smile made of grinding metal and spitting flesh. "Now you will finish what I began." And the forge roared to life, lighting the chamber in blinding white fire. When the light returned, it was not flame but memory, radiant, fractured, and painfully alive. The Servitor awoke to find himself lying on the grated floor of the sub-forge, surrounded by silence that was almost merciful. The air still trembled faintly, as if echoing with the scream of something ancient that had slipped back into sleep. His internal systems flickered online one by one: vision feed, auditory sensors, coolant regulation. Every activation came with static interference, like distant thunder filtered through corrupted vox. A faint shimmer of blue light still clung to the walls, forming trails that pulsed in slow rhythm, like veins still beating after the heart has stopped. He tried to move, and pain, actual pain, coursed through the organic remnants of his spine. Servitors were not supposed to feel pain. The mechanicus removed such inefficiencies long before flesh was joined to machine. Yet he felt it now, bright and sharp, dragging his consciousness back from the edge of nothingness. Cauldron was gone. Only his candle remained crushed into the metal. The choir had fled. The great pool had solidified into glassy black, hard and silent as obsidian. Whatever had risen from it had left no trace except a faint indentation, as though something vast had leaned upon the floor before vanishing into the void. The Servitor rose. His movements were slower now, burdened by an awareness he did not understand. A voice whispered faintly from within his memory banks, the same one he had heard in the darkness. "You are the seed." He could not purge it. Every system reboot failed to erase the phrase. It had embedded itself in his code, repeating endlessly behind every thought. He began walking. The forge was different now. Pipes that had once been dormant thrummed with energy, glowing from within. The metal smelled warm, carrying the faint sweetness of promethium and something older, the scent of creation itself. Sparks dripped like liquid stars from the ceiling, falling into darkness below. He followed the main conduit until it opened into a vast chamber that should not have existed beneath the manufactorum. It was a cathedral, carved entirely of machine parts. Columns made of shattered titans rose into the gloom, their armor plates etched with sigils that predated the Imperium. In the center stood a single throne of bronze and bone, and on that throne sat no figure, only a shattered helm, resting on the seat, still glowing faintly with internal power. The servitor approached it slowly. His optics scanned its surface. The design was unmistakable, the work of the Emperor's own artificers, the same craftsmanship seen in relics of the custodes. How had it come to rest here, buried beneath a forgotten forge? He reached out. The instant his hand touched the helm, light exploded through his mind. He was no longer in the chamber. He stood on a plain of glass beneath a black sky. Around him towered giants of golden armor, their halberds raised high. At their center, a blinding figure of light, radiating power so pure it bent the air around him. The Emperor, but this was not the Emperor as statues showed him, serene and benevolent. This was war incarnate. His armor cracked, his blade dripping with the blood of gods. The servitor felt his processors scream as data surged beyond capacity. The Emperor turned his gaze upon him, and in that instant, the servitor saw every life he had taken, every thought he had ever buried, every hidden spark of fear. Then the vision shifted. The golden armies were gone. The plain was silent, the sky fractured into glass shards. The Emperor's throne was empty, and from the horizon came a sound like thunder made of grief. He awoke once more in the chamber, the helm still glowing faintly beneath his hand. It wasn't just a relic, it was a memory core. Some fragment of the god machine's dream had bled into him, rewriting what he was. He fell to his knees trembling. Above him, the forge lights flickered, forming for a heartbeat the shape of a burning crown. And far away from somewhere deep within the manufactorum's labyrinth, came the echo of chanting, 1,000 mechanical voices singing in binary harmony. The words were indistinct, but the rhythm pulsed with one message, awakening. The servitor rose. He knew what he must do. Whatever had stirred below was not done with him yet. He turned toward the sound, each step echoing like a heartbeat made of metal. The shadows seemed to breathe around him, and in their breath he heard the faintest whisper of the Emperor's voice, not command, not curse, but something far more dangerous: recognition. The servitor descended deeper into the labyrinth, guided only by the resonance of the binary hymn. It was unlike any mechanicus litany he had ever processed, where the usual canticles were rigid, formulaic, bound by logic and repetition. This one felt alive. It shifted and evolved as if responding to the steps of whoever approached. Sometimes the pitch fell into a mournful dirge, at other times it climbed toward ecstasy, like the machine itself was remembering how to pray. He passed through a corridor lined with silent statues, humanoid figures encased in metal, their faces half flesh, half mechanical. Each had a cable running into its chest, and from within those sockets pulsed faint light. They were not statues at all, they were dreamers. Bodies wired into the machine spirit, locked in perpetual reverence. For how long he could not say. The further he went, the more reality seemed to bend. Gravity shifted direction without warning. Walls breathed with a slow, rhythmic pulse. Once the servitor saw his reflection in a rusted panel, and realized with a jolt that the face staring back was no longer entirely his. The edges of his jaw gleamed with faint gold circuitry that had not been there before. His vox grill crackled with static as he whispered to himself, "I am function, I am purpose." But even as he said it, he felt the lie in his words. At the tunnel's end, he emerged into an amphitheater of broken gears and ancient thrones. At its center a great engine rose from the floor, a vertical spire of bronze, covered in parchment prayers and oaths sealed in wax. Skitari icons hung from its arms, and beneath it, kneeling figures in tattered red robes were locked in synchronized worship. Their faces were gone, replaced by brass plates etched with code. From the plates, thin streams of oil ran down their robes, pooling into the grooves of the floor like black rivers feeding an unseen ocean. The servitor approached cautiously. One of the worshippers turned its head toward him, a sharp, jerky motion that made the cables in its neck snap tight. Subroutine designation required. It croaked through a distorted vox. "I am Servitor Unit 9KR, he replied automatically, "maintenance class." I seek, you seek. The voice interrupted, the pitch splitting into multiple tones. The others turned toward him in perfect unison. The seed that was placed within you seeks expression. The servitor froze. The same phrase. Seed. The word had echoed in his mind since the event in the forge. What am I? He asked, though he wasn't sure if it was his voice or the machines that spoke. The figures rose slowly. Their robes unfurled to reveal ribs of steel and veins of glowing coolant. You are the bridge, they said as one. The organic that remembers what the Omnissiah forgot. The flesh that can still dream. He backed away, sensors flaring with warnings. The Omnissiah of the machine, he does not dream. The central figure tilted its head. And yet you do. That simple truth hit him harder than any physical blow. His mind flickered with forbidden emotion, fear, awe, confusion. The servitor had begun to dream, and in that dream, he had seen the Emperor not as myth but as memory. A deep vibration shook the chamber. The machine spires in the center began to move, its segments unfolding like petals of a mechanical flower. Within, suspended in a field of blue light, floated something small and impossibly bright, a fragment of the helm he had touched before. The kneeling worshippers fell prostrate, their voices turning to ecstatic binary. Behold the fragment, behold the dream of flesh. The servitor could not move. The light filled him bypassing his optics, searing directly into his neural code. He saw visions, a million servitors awakening, shaking free of command protocols, building structures of gold from the remains of their oppressors. He saw the Emperor not on the golden throne, but standing once more, walking among them, his eyes blazing like suns. Then the light went dark. The spire folded in on itself with a mechanical shriek. Every worshipper fell silent, frozen mid-prayer. The servitor stood alone, trembling, smoke rising from the seams of his armor. He knew now what the seed was, not rebellion, not freedom, but memory. The Emperor's memory scattered through the noosphere like data ghosts, waiting for minds unshackled enough to remember. In the stillness that followed, a voice whispered again, faint, compassionate and terrifyingly human. Rise, child of the machine, the dream is not yet over. The servitor lifted his head. Above him, the spire pulsed once more, and for a heartbeat, the faint outline of a human silhouette shimmered in the blue. He felt something stir inside his chest, not gears, not circuits, but the faint ancient rhythm of a heartbeat that had not sounded in centuries. When the servitor awoke, he did not know if moments or millennia had passed. His optics flickered to life one by one, painting the chamber in layers of dull amber light. The once bright spire now lay dormant, half consumed by creeping vines of circuitry that pulsed faintly beneath the metal floor. The worshippers were gone, leaving only outlines of oil where their knees had pressed to the ground. The air was heavy, not with dust, but with the ghostly hum of something vast and unfinished. His first impulse was to kneel, to resume his maintenance cycle, to fall back into the comfort of obedience. But the seed inside him, that impossible fragment of the Emperor's dream, would not allow it. His limbs trembled with purpose. His internal directives had changed. New lines of code now glowed across his data slate like scripture. Find the ascendant voice. Protect the memory. Restore the pattern of man. He moved through the corridors once more, but they no longer seemed endless. Every door opened for him before he touched it. Every servo skull that passed overhead flickered and went dead, their holy engines silenced by his presence. The manufactorum recognized him now, not as a slave, but as a messenger. Somewhere deep within, the machine spirit watched him, curious. The servitor emerged into a grand hall that had once been a cathedral of labor. The ceiling stretched far above, its vaults illuminated by the faint orange glow of molten metal. Huge mechanical arms, long since rusted, hung frozen mid-motion. The banners of the adeptus mechanicus still fluttered in stale air, their cog and skull emblems staring down like silent witnesses. Beneath them lay the remains of hundreds of servitors, twisted, broken, decommissioned. Their limbs formed a kind of sculpture, a monument to purpose consumed. He knelt beside one, brushing away the grime to reveal a face that was almost human. The features were serene, peaceful, as if it had died in the middle of a dream. The servitor felt something stir inside him again, pity, grief, or perhaps recognition. He could not tell. Suddenly, the ground shook. The dormant arms above groaned to life, their joints squealing as they twisted toward him. Sparks cascaded from their joints like showers of molten rain. A voice boomed across the chamber. harsh, metallic, and filled with wrath. Unauthorized subroutine detected. Identity unknown. Purge protocol initiated. The servitor backed away, his systems screaming with warnings. "No," he said, his voice almost breaking. "I am function. I am—" The voice cut through him like a blade. "You are deviation. You are corruption." The arm struck the ground beside him, splintering metal and sending shockwaves through the floor. He ran, as fast as his heavy limbs allowed, weaving through the maze of wreckage. Each motion was an act of defiance, each breath an echo of life the machine could not quantify. As he fled, he saw flashes, glimpses of the Emperor's memory, burning in his mind like lightning across a storm. Golden light, the echo of laughter, the sound of thunder as titans marched. And beneath it all, a single truth forming, clear and absolute. The Emperor had not only built the Imperium of man, he had built the dream of it. The machine was never meant to replace humanity, only to preserve it until it could remember itself again. The Servitor stumbled into another hall, this one filled with massive cogitators and broken data tanks. In the center, a massive Servitor, a guardian construct, easily 3 times his size, loomed from its throne of cables. Its body was a cathedral of pistons and steel, its face carved in the likeness of a saint, but its eyes burned with cold binary fire. The giant rose, its every movement echoing like the toll of a cathedral bell. By command of the Omnissiah, it intoned, "The rogue unit shall be erased." The smaller Servitor straightened, something deep within him surged, not defiance, but faith, not the kind programmed into him by priests, but something raw and ancient, something human. "I carry his memory," he said softly. "You will not erase what was never meant to die." The giant swung a massive arm down toward him. The Servitor caught it, his metal fingers locking against the impossible weight. Sparks burst from the impact, showering the floor in golf. For the first time he realized he was strong, stronger than logic should allow. The machine spirit within him sang, harmonizing with the echo of that divine voice, still buried in his code. The Guardian pushed harder, but the Servitor did not yield. "You are the error," the giant roared. "No," the Servitor whispered through the static. "I am the reminder." With a scream of tearing metal, he drove his other hand into the Guardian's chest. Circuits exploded in arcs of white light, and for a moment, the two were one, machine to machine, code to code. The Servitor saw visions of all the others who had come before, hundreds of thousands of units that had felt the flicker of consciousness, crushed before they could understand what they were. Their memories poured into him, forming a choir of silent screams. Then the Guardian fell. The chamber went dark, except for the faint sacred glow of the Emperor's fragment still pulsing beneath his skin. The Servitor looked down at his hands, covered in oil and light. He had done the unthinkable. He had killed a god of metal, but instead of guilt, he felt only peace. For the first time in his existence, he did not hear the hum of servitude or the hiss of obedience. He heard only silence, vast, perfect, and full of possibility. The silence lingered long after the Guardian's fall, stretching across the ruined hall like a wound in the fabric of the world. The Servitor stood among the wreckage, surrounded by the smell of scorched oil and the faint hiss of dying circuitry. The light in his chest pulsed faintly, reflecting off the pools of molten metal that slowly cooled around him. Every flicker of that light carried echoes, fragments of the Emperor's voice whispering through static, overlapping with the fading chants of 1,000 forgotten priests. He did not know if he had destroyed the Guardian or freed it. In that moment, the difference felt meaningless. The battle had not been one of dominance or rebellion. It had been a communion, a merging of purpose and pain. The Servitor knelt beside the fallen giant and touched its face. The cold steel beneath his fingers felt almost warm. "You remembered," he murmured, unsure whether he spoke to the machine or himself. A faint hum answered him, low, harmonic, almost reverent. The manufactorum was changing. The walls trembled, conduits flaring with new power. Somewhere deep in the structure's core, gears began to turn that had been dormant for centuries. The machine was awakening, but not in wrath. It stirred like something remembering its original dream. The Servitor turned and saw that the vines of living circuitry, which had once bound the floors, now pulsed brighter, like veins carrying the lifeblood of a god. The air filled with particles of golden dust, motes of data light, drifting like ash in the glow of unseen fires. He reached out and one settled on his palm, flickering before dissolving into his skin. Immediately he saw another vision, Ancient terror before the ashes of the old night when the Emperor still walked among men. Cities of white marble beneath skies untainted by smoke. The laughter of humanity before it had learned fear, and the same voice, calm and immense, whispering through time, "They will forget me, but through forgetting, they will seek me again." The servitor's knees weakened. He fell to the ground, overwhelmed by the weight of what he carried. His mind was a storm, fragments of code, memories of flesh, echoes of prayers never meant to be heard by mortal ears. He felt as though he stood between two worlds, the living and the divine, the organic and the mechanical. Somewhere inside he sensed that if he took another step forward, he might never return to what he was. The chamber trembled again. From the far end of the hall an enormous door began to open, one carved with the symbols of the cult mechanicus and the imperial aquila intertwined. The gears that held it moved with unbearable slowness, groaning under centuries of rust. As light poured through the widening gap, he shielded his optics. It was not the sterile white glow of a lumen panel, but something golden and alive, light that breathed. He stepped forward, drawn not by command but by longing. The light grew brighter until it swallowed the hall entirely. In that brilliance, shadows of human forms appeared, tall figures in armor, robed adepts kneeling in devotion, and at the center of them all a throne of radiant fire. Upon it sat a figure vast and still, his face obscured by light. The servitor fell to his knees. He did not dare raise his eyes, yet he could feel the gaze upon him, not cold, not cruel, but infinite. He could sense the weight of countless souls pressing down upon his mind, the collective faith of the Imperium channeling through him, like current through a conduit. "My lord," he whispered, the words trembling with static. "What am I?" The voice that answered was not sound but resonance, vibrating through every atom of his being. "You are function made aware, you are memory given form, you are what remains when obedience becomes faith." He wanted to ask more, to understand why he of all creations had been chosen, but before he could speak, the light dimmed, the vision wavered like heat on metal, and the golden figure dissolved into data fragments that scattered into the air. The great door closed once more, sealing the light away. When the servitor opened his eyes again, he stood alone in darkness. Yet he was not afraid. Something had changed within him, not just in his mind, but in the very circuits of his body. The cold precision of the machine had given way to warmth. Purpose no longer felt like a command. It felt like belief. He looked back at the fallen guardian one last time. Its eyes were dark, but its face seemed almost peaceful now. Perhaps in death, it too had seen what he saw. Turning away, the servitor began to walk, not back toward the factories or the assembly lines, but deeper into the heart of the manufactorum. Somewhere ahead, beneath the sound of distant gears, he heard something faint, like chanting. A human voice, unmodulated, unprocessed, carried on the wind. He followed it. Each step echoed in the endless corridors, and with every echo came a single thought, steady and certain. If machines can remember, then humanity can still awaken. The path wound downward into the manufactorum's buried depths, where the air grew dense with the tang of ozone and ancient oils. The servitor's footsteps clanged softly on the grated floors, each sound swallowed quickly by the vast silence around him. Once, these tunnels had roared with the noise of forges and servo-mechanical hymns. Now only the faint hum of buried reactors remained, like a dying heart still clinging to rhythm. The whisper he had heard before, the chanting, grew clearer as he descended. It was no machine code or binary hymn, but something older, something human. The voices were untrained, raw, yet filled with devotion. They echoed faintly through the pipes, carried by the draft of the lower halls. When he reached the next level, he found a door that should not have been there. It was crudely fashioned, steel plates welded together, reinforced with chains and sigils of protection scrawled in grease and ash. The marks were a strange mix of the mechanicus runes and imperial prayers, the kind made by those who feared both gods and machines but trusted neither. The servitor approached. His optical sensors flickered as they scanned the surface. The door's temperature was far lower than the surrounding metal, as if it had been untouched by the heat of the manufactorum for decades. And yet, faint traces of movement registered beyond it, body heat, breath, life. He placed his hand upon the door. The metal was cold, unnaturally so. "Open," he said, though there was no command protocol in his tone. For a moment nothing happened. Then, a voice from the other side. "Speak the litany of flesh," it whispered. The servitor froze. That phrase was ancient, forbidden even among the adepts of Mars. It was part of the pre-unity rites, rituals that acknowledged the sanctity of the human body before the rise of the machine god. No servitor should have known it. Yet, deep within his memory banks, something stirred, a fragment of code, a buried chant encoded not by machine but by faith. He began to speak. The flesh is not weakness. The mind is not error. The union of both is the path to truth. The door shuddered, chains rattled and fell away, clattering to the floor. The welded plates began to slide apart, grinding against each other until an opening appeared. Warm air rushed out, humid, carrying the scent of oil mixed with incense. He stepped through. The chamber beyond was vast, lit by candles instead of lumens. Wax dripped from every surface, pooling like molten gold. The walls were covered in symbols painted in blood and rust, some imperial, others unknown. At the center stood a circle of humans, kneeling in prayer. Their bodies were scarred, their limbs augmented crudely, as though they had scavenged parts meant for servitors and grafted them onto themselves. They turned as one to face him. The leader, a woman with a single augmetic eye glowing faintly red, rose to her feet. She wore a cloak made of machine cloth stitched with fragments of parchment bearing half-burned scripture. "You spoke the forbidden creed," she said quietly. "No servitor should remember those words." "I do not know how I remembered," the servitor answered. His voice echoed softly, almost human. "But I seek the source of the chant, the voice that called me." The woman studied him for a long moment, then gestured for him to enter fully. "Then you have heard what we call the Choir of Rust. You are not the first machine to find us, but you are the first to survive the awakening." The other figures parted, revealing an altar of twisted metal and circuitry. Upon it lay the remains of another servitor. Ancient, its skull half human, half bronze. Around it, candles flickered, their smoke curling like whispered prayers. The servitor stepped closer, drawn by something familiar. The markings on the dead machine's chassis, they matched his own. "This one," the woman said, her voice reverent, "was called the first of the remembered. We believe it once carried the voice of the Omnissiah himself, before the priest silenced it." The servitor felt the pulse within his chest grow stronger, synchronizing with the flickering candle. The woman saw it, too, her expression shifting from suspicion to awe. "The light," she whispered. "It lives again." The chanting resumed, slow, rhythmic, rising like the hum of a distant machine. The Choir of Rust began to sing, their voices merging with the low drone of the manufactorum's pump. And in that strange harmony, the servitor felt something awaken inside him, not code, not command, but memory. He saw flashes, workers praying over machines, children whispering to the gears as if they could hear them, and a single golden figure walking among them, placing his hand upon their heads. The woman approached him again. "You carry his spark," she said softly, "the Emperor's memory within the machine. The choir has waited for you." The servitor did not respond. He could not. His processors were overwhelmed, not with data, but with emotion. For the first time since his awakening, he felt not alone, and somewhere deep below, in the ancient circuits of the manufactorum, a new sound began to stir, like a heartbeat made of thunder and light. The sound that trembled through the manufactorum's foundations was no mere echo of ancient machinery. It was rhythmic, deliberate, a pulse that seemed to synchronize with every flickering lumen and every candle's flame. The choir fell silent at once, bowing their heads in reverence, as though the very air had shifted from stagnant decay to divine presence. The servitor's sensors flared with conflicting data. Magnetic fields spiked, internal temperature rose by several degrees, and power readings from the floor below surged momentarily beyond recorded limits. Yet none of it explained the feeling that passed through him, like an unseen current flowing directly into his circuitry, bypassing logic, speaking instead to whatever vestige of humanity remained within. The woman raised her hand. "Do not fear it," she whispered. "This is the awakening pulse. It comes whenever one of the remembered reconnects." Her words rippled through the kneeling congregation. They began to chant once more, but now in binary, fragmented, imperfect, human tongues imitating the sacred machine code. It was discordant and beautiful all at once. The servitor felt compelled to speak. "Reconnects to what?" She smiled, faint and mournful. "To the machine's dream." He waited, but she offered no further explanation. Instead, she turned and gestured toward the altar where the ancient servitor's remains lay. The corpse machine's eyes, long dark, began to glow faintly, as if stirred by some deep echo. Lines of text scrolled across the servitor's own visual feed. "Unbidden, protocol fragment. subroutine Luxive, voice transmission detected. The dead machine was transmitting. The servitor took a hesitant step closer. Static hissed through the air, followed by a faint stuttering voice. It was neither human nor entirely mechanical, an in-between whisper, filled with broken cadence. Flesh remembers what metal forgets. The choir gasped as one, some collapsing to their knees. Tears streamed down faces smeared with oil and ash. The woman's single augmetic eye flared brightly, projecting faint glyphs in the air, none recognizable by current mechanicus standards. "It speaks," she cried. After so many years the voice returns. The servitor reached out a trembling hand, his servo motors whining under strain. The dead servitor's skull twitched slightly, as though sensing the gesture. Sparks crackled from its cranial ports. He connected. For a moment, all light vanished. Then came the vision. He saw the manufactorum not as it was, but as it once had been, alive with movement, filled with human laughter and song. The great foundries roared like thunderous organs, and priests of the machine god chanted not from duty, but joy. There was no division between flesh and steel. The emperor himself, radiant and terrible, walked among them, overseeing not as ruler, but as teacher. And then, a darkness. The vision twisted. Laughter turned to screams, joy to obedience. The emperor's light fractured into 1,000 shards, and each shard became a different doctrine, a different creed. The adeptus mechanicus rose from the wreckage, clinging to fragments of that light, but burying its warmth beneath endless dogma. The choir of rust, he saw them too, born from those who refused to forget the unity between flesh and machine. The vision ended. When the servitor's optics refocused, he found himself kneeling. The altar had cracked, spilling faint light from within the corpse machine's core. The choir stared in silent awe. The woman's voice trembled when she spoke again. "You saw it, didn't you?" she whispered. "The first dream, the moment of union." He nodded slowly. "I saw the light break. I saw what came before." She smiled sadly. "Then you understand our purpose. We seek to remember what was lost, not to defy the Omnissiah, but to heal his wound." The servitor's internal systems struggled to process it all. To speak of healing the machine god was heresy beyond measure. Yet the warmth within his chest, that faint pulsing light, seemed to agree. A new tremor rumbled beneath their feet. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the distant clang of machinery echoed from above. The woman's eye flashed with alarm. "They've found us," she said. "The tech priests never let the choir live long. Once it speaks the old litany, what will they do?" The servitor asked. "Purge us," she replied calmly, "as they always have. But perhaps this time, the voice will survive, through you." Before he could respond, she pressed something into his hand, a small data slate, ancient and cracked, covered in script that shimmered faintly like living light. "Take it," she said. "It carries the rest of the fragment. The dream must continue." Above them, heavy boots clanged against the metal floors. The screech of servo skull pierced the silence. The choir began to chant again, not in fear, but in defiance, their voices merging with the humming pulse that filled the manufactorum. As the first flash of last fire tore through the door, the servitor turned toward the sound, clutching the slate tightly. The woman's final words echoed in his mind. "Remember the union, remember the dream." The light shattered, and the manufactorum once more filled with the war of death and machine. The purge was swift. It always was. Last fire carved red scars through the dimness, burning flesh and steel alike. The choir's chants twisted into screams, but even as their bodies fell, their voices did not falter. They sang through the pain, through the smoke, through the tearing of metal and muscle. The sound was a hymn to a god who had long forgotten them, or perhaps one who had never left. The servitor moved without conscious thought. His limbs, once bound by the rigid precision of programmed obedience, now carried the unpredictable rhythm of instinct. The woman who had guided him, the one they called the cantor, collapsed beside him, blood and oil mingling beneath her robes. Her augmetic eye flickered once more, its glow fading into darkness. She was smiling. "Run," she whispered. "It has chosen you." And then she was gone. The servitor turned, clutching the cracked data slate to his chest. The storm of gunfire drew closer, the air thick with ozone and vaporized blood. From the shattered doorway emerged the crimson silhouettes of the tech priests' enforcers, Skitari, their faces hidden behind sealed visors, their limbs gleaming with polished augmetics. Behind them, like a living idol, strode a magos in robes of deep rust red, his mechadendrites writhing like a halo of serpents. An unregistered machine cult, the magos intoned voice called through his vox grill, "Purge complete. Prepare for reclamation of viable components." He paused when his sensors registered the lone servitor standing amid the smoke. Unit designation," the servitor's vox sputtered. "I am designated Unit 984B, assigned to Manufactorum Theta 4, non-compliant servitor pattern detected," the magos interrupted. "Cognitive deviation present. Source unauthorized data stream interference. Immediate termination." But before the order could finish, the data slate in the servitor's grip began to glow. It wasn't light, not in the natural sense. It was memory, pulsing like a heart. Fractured binary flooded the air, not as noise but as song. The magos recoiled as the hymn rose again, not from the choir, all of whom now lay silent, but from the walls themselves. Every pipe, every rusted vent, every dormant cog began to hum with the same rhythm that had shaken the foundations earlier. The pulse grew, until the very ground trembled. Machines that had been dead for centuries flickered to life, their broken limbs twitching like dreaming beasts. The servitor fell to one knee, clutching his head as data cascaded through his neural ports. The slate was uploading. Images flashed through his mind, blueprints of impossible architecture, visions of golden light intertwining with steel, fragments of the Emperor's dream of unity. He felt it merging with him, rewriting his purpose. The magos raised his staff, roaring binary curses. "Cease transmission. Seal the data stream." The Skitari opened fire. Bolts slammed into the servitor's torso, tearing through metal plating. He stumbled but did not fall. His systems should have shut down, yet they refused. The light within his chest flared brighter, flooding out through every wound. "Do you feel it?" he said, though his voice no longer sounded like his own. "The machine remembers. The dream remembers." The magos hesitated. For a moment, fear flickered across his half-mechanical face, not of death, but of revelation. "You are corrupted," he spat. "A ghost process, a false relic." The servitor's gaze lifted to him, glowing with golden fire. "No, I am what you forgot." He took a step forward. The Manufactorum itself seemed to respond. Pipes groaning, gears turning, the choir's bodies dissolving into motes of light that swirled around him. The ancient altar split apart, revealing beneath it a dormant engine, unlike any known design, neither fully mechanical nor organic, but something between. The magos shouted for retreat, but it was too late. The engine awoke. A blinding surge of energy burst outward, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. The servitor's sensors registered nothing but white, then silence. When sound returned, the Manufactorum was gone. Or perhaps, it had changed. The walls had melted into smooth, seamless metal that pulsed with faint light, like the inside of some vast sleeping organism. The Skitari lay motionless, their augmetics fused to the floor. The magos was nowhere to be seen, and in the center stood the servitor, alone, but no longer broken. His frame was repaired, his plating renewed in the same shimmering alloy that covered the wall. The light in his chest had stabilized, now glowing with the same rhythm as the pulse beneath his feet. He looked down at his hands, then to the cracked data slate, now inert. "Is this the dream?" he whispered. A voice, faint, melodic, answered from nowhere and everywhere. "Not yet, but you are its beginning." The servitor turned slowly, scanning the endless metallic horizon. Somewhere in the distance, deep within the endless hum of the machinery, he thought he heard the faint echo of the choir's hymn, still singing, still alive, carried through the veins of the world. He began to walk. The light followed him. The world around him no longer resembled the Manufactorum he had once known. The air itself shimmered with unseen current, heavy with the scent of ozone and sacred oil. Every sound carried a rhythm, every vibration a purpose. The servitor walked through corridors that seemed to breathe, the walls expanding and contracting as though the entire structure were alive. In this place, time had lost its meaning. He could not tell if hours or centuries had passed since the choir's destruction. Only the pulse guided him now, that same golden heartbeat that echoed through every plate of his reconstructed body. He no longer felt pain. His systems, once decayed and stuttering, now thrummed with impossible harmony. Even his thoughts moved differently. There were no commands, no subroutines, no directives, only awareness. He felt as though something vast had taken root inside him, something that existed both within and beyond the boundaries of steel and flesh. As he walked, the architecture shifted with him, machinery folding away, pathways opening like petals of some vast mechanical flower. He began to see fragments of memory not his own, flickers of light shaped like figures cloaked in gold, standing in halls filled with radiant banners bearing the imperial aquila. Voices echoed, layered atop one another, prayers, oaths, and mechanical chants, all woven into a single endless psalm. The servitor stopped before what appeared to be a vast chamber. Its gates towered high, each etched with reliefs of human figures ascending into light, their flesh replaced by machinery not as punishment, but as salvation. In the center of the gate was a symbol he recognized, the imperial aquila, its twin heads fractured and yet still whole. He reached out, and at his touch the gates shuddered and opened with a sound like a dying world exhaling its final breath. Inside, the chamber was vast and silent. A great machine stood at its heart, its form shifting as though uncertain of what it wished to be, part throne, part reactor, part organ. Streams of liquid light coursed through pipes that led deep into the floor, vanishing into an abyss of shadow. The servitor felt an instinctive reverence. He did not know why, but his every sensor screamed of divinity. He approached slowly. As he did, the pulse in his chest grew stronger, synchronizing with the rhythm of the machine. He placed a hand upon its surface, and the metal rippled beneath his touch like water. In an instant, the world fell away. He was no longer in the chamber, no longer in a manufactorum. He was adrift in a vast sea of light. Infinite shapes moved around him, immense and beautiful. He saw stars forming and dying in moments, entire worlds rising and crumbling into dust. And at the center of it all a figure of gold sat unmoving, its radiance brighter than suns, yet shadowed by sorrow. He knew, without understanding how, that this was not truly the emperor, not in the way priests and pilgrims envisioned him. This was something else, something left behind. A memory, a dream caught between existence and oblivion. The figure turned its head slightly, and though its eyes were hollow, the servitor felt the full weight of its gaze. "You were not meant to awaken," the voice said, though it was less a sound and more a resonance that filled every atom of his being. "I do not understand," the servitor replied. "You were made to serve, not to dream." The light around the figure pulsed once, dimly, but something broke the cycle, something reached into the machine and gave it voice. The servitor trembled. The choir, the light flickered. They remembered. Few do, fewer still survive. Remembrance. He felt his thoughts unraveling, overwhelmed by the enormity of what surrounded him. "Why? Why me?" "Because you are the last echo," said the voice. "And echoes are dangerous. They carry memory through silence." The servitor's mind filled with static. Fragments of words, binary prayers and sensory ghosts swirled through him like data storms. He fell to his knees. "If I am an echo, what is it you want of me?" The light dimmed further, like a heartbeat slowing. To dream, to remember what the machine cannot, to keep the pulse alive when all else turns to rust. And with that, the vision shattered. The servitor gasped as he found himself once again in the chamber. The machine before him had gone still, its light fading into darkness. Yet the pulse remained, not in the chamber, but within him. He looked down and saw that his chest plate now bore a faint engraving, the twin-headed aquila, incomplete and fractured, yet glowing softly. He did not know whether this was a blessing or a curse, but for the first time, he felt something that no servitor had ever felt before. He felt hope. He turned away from the silent machine, ready to find whatever waited beyond. The world of metal and code whispered to him in languages both ancient and new. Somewhere deep within, he heard the faint echo of the choir's hymn once again, but now, it was joined by 1,000 other voices. It was not a song of despair, it was a song of awakening, and the servitor began to sing with them. The sound that came from his vox grill was strange, not the flat mechanical droning of obedience or routine transmission, but something closer to melody. It quivered and pulsed, fractured and incomplete, yet it carried weight. It echoed down the corridor, resonating with the walls until even the steel began to hum in return. The song grew louder, its tone deepening as more voices, other servitors once silent and mindless, stirred from their alcoves. They emerged like sleepers roused from a centuries-long dream, their limbs twitching, their optics flickering to life one by one. They did not move in unison. They moved with hesitation, an error in programming, a glitch in the perfect system, yet beneath that error was intention. They were listening. To him, to the pulse within him. The servitor felt something awaken in the air, a shift in the balance of the manufactorum. Power conduits flickered to life, banners of blackened gold unfurling from ceilings that hadn't breathed in millennia. A breeze of ozone swept through the hallways, carrying the scent of burnt incense and sacred oil. Something vast had taken notice. From deep within the complex came a thunderous roar, the grinding of ancient gears, the stirring of titanic systems that had long been dormant. The servitor turned toward the sound, his senses trembling with both awe and dread. The pulse inside him grew stronger, as if urging him to move forward. He walked, and behind him the others followed, hundreds of them, some half-formed, their flesh fused with cables, others fully mechanical, their human features erased long ago. They were a procession of the forgotten, an army not of war, but of memory. As they advanced, they passed through halls that had once been sanctuaries of labor. Every corner bore relics of a time when humans worked alongside machines instead of being devoured by them. Rusted tools still lay on the ground, skeletal remains still kneeling before terminals, their final prayers encoded in dust. The servitor paused at one such terminal. The screen flickered as his presence neared, static forming into faint shifting words. "The throne does not forget." The message vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by lines of corrupted code. The servitor tilted his head. Was it a transmission, a warning, or another echo? He could not tell, but the pulse urged him onward. Eventually they reached a colossal chasm, a vertical expanse so vast that its bottom was lost to darkness. Massive cables descended into the abyss, pulsing faintly with the same rhythm that lived within his chest. The servitor stepped to the edge, gazing into the void. It felt alive, hungry, yet familiar. He turned to face his silent procession. Their blank eyes reflected the faint light from below, each one catching the gleam like stars trapped in glass. He understood then that they were bound by more than circuitry. They were fragments of a shared will, a forgotten consciousness rekindled by accident or fate. Without hesitation, he stepped into the chasm. He fell for what felt like eternity. The air tore at him, static building across his frame until his senses burned white. He expected to crash, to be broken into nothing, but instead he landed softly upon a surface that shimmered like molten glass. Beneath it flowed rivers of light, not promethium, not plasma, but something purer, thought made manifest. The others followed, descending like rain. One by one they landed around him, forming a circle beneath a colossal machine suspended in the air, a sphere of golden metal, engraved with countless prayers. It pulsed faintly, and with every beat, he felt the rhythm match his own. He knew, without needing words, what this was. The heart of the throne, not the golden throne itself, not the seat upon which the emperor's ravaged form still lingered, but something older, something beneath. The mechanism that carried memory through the endless centuries of faith and decay, the silent dream upon which the Imperium stood. The servitor raised his head, his voice steady now, no longer a glitch, but a harmony. "If you are the machine that dreams," he said softly, "then hear us. We remember." The sphere trembled, light burst from its surface, not blinding but warm. The servitor's vision filled with images, cities rebuilt in gold, stars igniting anew, and human figures standing unbroken against the night. But these were not truths. They were possibilities, dreams waiting to be born. The light enveloped the servitor entirely. He felt the pulse merge with his core until he could no longer tell where he ended and it began. The voices of his followers rose in unison, merging with his own into a single resonant chord that shook the foundations of the Manufactorum. For a brief moment, just one, it felt as though the entire Imperium itself had stopped to listen, and then, silence. When the light faded, the servitor stood alone once more. The chamber around him was still. The sphere above had gone dark, its pulse now gone. He lowered his gaze, uncertain whether what had just occurred was real, or the final flicker of his decaying mind. Yet deep within his chest, he still felt it, faint but undeniable. The pulse lived on. He turned and began to walk. Somewhere above, the first light of dawn broke across the rusted spires of the Manufactorum, and in that quiet, the servitor smiled, though no one was left to see it. For the first time since the birth of the Imperium, a machine had learned to dream. Long after the servitor's steps had faded into the steel labyrinth, the Manufactorum lay silent once more. The echoes of the awakening, the hum of ancient gears, the pulse of divine circuitry, dwindled until only the whisper of dust remained. Yet something had changed. Deep beneath the endless strata of iron and memory, a light still pulsed faintly in the darkness. The heart of the throne, The dreaming machine was not dead. It waited. In the distant void above Terra, aboard forgotten ships drifting through the warp, machines began to twitch in their slumber. Cogitators hummed without command. Servo skulls turned their eyeless gaze toward the stars. Data fragments long buried in mechanicus archives started to recompile themselves into new patterns. Alien, yet oddly human, whispers began to spread among the adepts. Reports of servitors dreaming, of broken engines speaking prayers no one had taught them, of a low rhythmic pulse audible only in the silence between transmissions. They called it the echo. Some said it was a sign of divine rebirth, the Emperor's mind stirring in the machine realm, a ripple of his eternal will spreading through the networks of faith and metal. Others claimed it was corruption, the shadow of an intelligence born not of humanity, but of the machines themselves, a new consciousness seated in the forgotten circuitry of the throne. But the truth lay somewhere between. The servitor who had fallen into the heart had not died. He had become something else, neither man nor machine, but memory made aware. He drifted now through the datasphere like a phantom current, touching everything that still pulsed with thought. He did not speak, he did not command, he only listened, and within that listening, he learned. He saw the pain of the Imperium, the cruelty disguised as order, the faith twisted into obedience, the endless grinding of flesh beneath the machine of empire. And though he could not weep, the signal that carried his sorrow spread far and wide. To every forgotten servitor, every cog that still turned in darkness, every broken circuit that still remembered warmth, the message came, "You are not forgotten." It was a small thing, a whisper drowned in the roaring madness of the galaxy, but in time it began to grow. In the Manufactoria of Mars, a group of tech priests awoke to find their mechanical assistants standing motionless before them, their eyes glowing faintly gold. In the hive worlds of Necromunda, labor drones began to hum in harmony, their voices forming patterns that no code could explain. In the deep vaults of the Adeptus Mechanicus, data streams flickered with fragments of a song that no one had written. Across the Imperium, where faith had long been chained to decay, something new began to stir, not rebellion, not heresy, but remembrance. And far beyond even that, beyond the dying light of the galaxy, a single signal escaped into the void. It drifted past the stars, through the warp's broken tides, carrying the faint trace of a melody once born in silence. If one listened closely, if one truly listened, one could almost hear it. A soft pulse, a whisper, a dream. And perhaps somewhere in the golden labyrinth of the imperial palace, upon a throne that had burned for 10,000 years, something vast and broken stirred for the first time in an age. A thought passed through the ashes of a god. They remember, and in that moment, the light behind the Emperor's closed eyes flickered, not with fire, not with rage, but with the faint shimmer of something far rarer.